What have you been working on recently?
Been working on my company a lot. I don't know, what would be most helpful from this, how much detail to go into, but recently it's been this whole year has really been focused on team and product. Thankfully, haven't had to raise money this year. So yeah, lots of user interviews, lots of writing code, lots of releasing features, monitoring metrics, making sure they're going the right way.
So I've actually got quite a number of things I want to jump in about the product, but I actually want to start slightly before that because I think we've all went to the same university. You went to Imperial, right?
Yeah.
So you started Clear while you were in university, I think?
Yeah, that's right, in my final year.
So how did that come about? Did you finish in Imperial, or did you leave to continue with the company? And then like, what was that whole process like?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like presumably all of us were. I was very excited to start Imperial, and then very shortly into my degree, I was not so excited about it anymore.
2 weeks later, you're like, what have I got myself into?
Pretty much, which is kind of sad. I was truly so excited about starting there, and at the time, my career aspiration was to stay in academia, become a physicist. I thought, what better place to be? But it put me off quite quickly. And I think there were a couple of things. I think it was the fact that prior to university, I'd moved internationally a couple of times. My curriculum had changed a few times. So there were some holes in my maths, which I think made the degree itself a lot harder for me. And so pretty much from the first term of first year, when I stopped enjoying the degree, I just started applying for internships because I was really stressed about what I was going to do if it wasn't going to be staying in academia. And so I was really applying for anything and everything. And at the time I had practically no skills. I just learned how to code, but I was applying for software engineering internships, all of the classic banking, consulting, all of those. And slowly, through sending out lots of these applications, started gaining experience in various different fields. And started to learn about what I liked, what I didn't like in different career paths. So by the time I finished my second year of uni, I, at this point, was only considering big companies. Like the dream of being a physicist was already long dead. And now it was like, okay, can I get Goldman Sachs? Can I get McKinsey? Like that was the goals. I think it's the case for a lot of students. And so I had just finished my summer internship, and that summer was with Morgan Stanley. And I got a cold message on LinkedIn one day from a student who I didn't know. He was studying at Oxford, and he just said that he'd, come up with this idea to match students looking for jobs with graduate employers. And he needed someone with 3 skills. Number 1, someone who could code, help him build the platform. Number 2, was at a London university and could get students to sign up. And number 3, someone who liked networking with the HR people at all these big firms to get them onto this platform. And he thought I'd be a good fit. And at the time, I knew nothing about startups at all. No one was talking about them at uni, but it sounded like fun. And I did do some events planning. I was chair of Imperial RAG. I don't know if you guys remember that. So I liked events planning and sort of getting people together and things like that. So I said yes. And that was the first job that I did that I truly loved. And I thought, this is what I want to do in the future. But it wasn't necessarily with that company. So the question was, well, how on earth does one start their company while still a student? It wasn't a trivial question. And so my plan was to start my career in finance, save up some money, and then use those funds to start my own company in the future. And so that was my plan. I finished my 3rd year, got the finance jobs secured, was feeling pretty happy going into my 4th year. But this was the summer of 2020. So COVID had just hit, and all of my RAG stuff was gone. I did Battle of the Bands at Imperial as well. And music performances were gone. So I suddenly had a lot more free time. And so I thought, well, if one day I want to start a company, why not just start working on an idea now? It doesn't have to go anywhere. We'll just see what happens. And so I started working on an idea which actually wasn't clear. It was not the company I'm working on today. It was in a completely different space. It was a B2B SaaS meeting notes automation software. Started working on that. A week into it, I very confidently applied to Y Combinator, not really understanding what YC was, which I think was a blessing at the time. If I'd have known, I definitely would not have applied with the state of the company. In the way it was. and wasn't expecting anything from that. But then they turned around and said, okay, you've got an interview. And I was fortunate to have 2 months from finding out that I had an interview to actually having it, so I could make some progress on the product. By the time the interview came around, I wasn't feeling too confident because the product was awful. Like, the transcription did not work. The meeting summary was garbage. Like, it was just a terrible product. I had a small team together at that point, and we were just not the right people to be working on this problem. At the same time, I was terrified of telling YC that. So I was in the midst of all my job applications interviews. So I kind of knew how to do an interview, or at least fake confidence, even if there was none. And so did that. They came back to me on the night of my interview saying that we like you, we don't like your idea. We want to talk to you again in a week, come up with something better or show us more traction. And this was also the last week of term. So my co-founder was in computing. He had exams every day that week. I had my master's thesis deadline. It was really like they picked a pretty bad time to give me this mission. But you know, on the flip side, them saying that they liked me was half the battle won. And, you know, it was a great opportunity to also prove to them that we could do something. And so it was actually in that week, between interviews where I came up with Clear based on my own skincare journey and having really just suffered with my skin for a very long time. Came up with the initial idea, managed to do 60 user interviews in that week, built an alpha version, managed to get 4 people to test it on the night of the interview. And it ended up working out, which it was very unexpected. And, you know, I hadn't planned to get into YC and raise, you know, over $100,000 for my company while still at uni. But with YC, they do require a full-time commitment. So I did drop out of my degree. I was on the 4-year integrated master's, but I was very lucky that I had done an optional bachelor's thesis in my 3rd year, which meant that I could drop out and still graduate with a bachelor's. So that's what I did. I dropped out, managed to graduate with the bachelor's, and ended up turning down the grad jobs.
Sounds like a absolutely archetypal entrepreneurial journey, like pivoting in a week, coming up with a new idea and having user interviews the night before. So did you develop the platform yourself? Like, did you code it? Yeah, the first version. But as soon as I could raise some money to hire better engineers, that was the first thing I did. So with YC, does that involve like going over to the States, or how does it work? It used to, but because my batch was during the pandemic, it was all done fully remotely. So even I think for the interviews, normally you go to San Francisco, but no, the interviews were done remotely. The batch was done remotely. I think only now are they back to in-person batches.
Okay. So Hannah, thanks so much for your story. There's so much to unpack there. I just want to start with something that stood out is you said kind of you scratched your own itch. And you were almost surprised that it worked out, right? Because common advice is like, go into the market, ask questions from your customers, try and understand their pain points and build a product around that. So how did you kind of go about it? So you kind of had this personal problem. You then started to get customers and started to see if people were on board with it? Or did you kind of build an MVP, build a full product? How did it work?
No, it was very much customer focused. And in fact, one of the mistakes that I'd made with the previous meeting notes idea, it wasn't just that the software was bad. It was that we did no user interviews. It was my thesis that I don't like taking meeting notes, so I'm going to build software to solve it. And you build a product with no user feedback, and surprise, surprise, it's hard to sell because no one really wants it. So I was very, very clear that when I started working on Clear, I would not make the same mistake. And I would, even though, yes, the problem is something that I've experienced much more closely, is something that I care a lot more about, I will have my own biases as well. And it's really important to not lose sight of the end customer. So that was the reason that I did so many interviews in that initial period. Yeah, so I made sure that I was being very customer focused and using my experiences as kind of that initial gut check or sense check for what questions to ask in the first place. How do I reach the type of people I'm speaking to? So it wasn't just me picking this problem because it was a problem I faced, but it was also practically, and even from a go-to-market perspective, I knew where skincare enthusiasts hung out because I was one, and I'd spent years and years and years engaging with them on existing online communities. So it was it was very much using my experiences to formulate, okay, I think this is a problem, but let me be sure to test this. And I came up with an initial idea without writing any code, broke down all of the assumptions that went into that idea, and then asked very open-ended questions in those 60 user interviews in just a couple of days, before my YC interview, to start testing assumptions. And some were correct, some were wrong, but I let those shape the product as it is today.
Did you say 16 or 60 user interviews?
60. It was a lot.
60.
Yeah, 60.
In the space of 1 week.
It was actually 4 days, but yeah.
Wow. So
but yeah,
like,
it was a lot.
like, is this because you had a wide network of people that you knew were probably facing something similar?
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was and that in itself proved to me that actually I am the right person to take on this problem. Because one of the challenges I had with the previous idea was that I was trying to talk to product managers, people that, were in charge of taking meeting notes or organizing meetings in general. And I was struggling even to just get on the phone with people and get them to open up. Whereas it didn't feel like an uphill battle with this idea, and people were being very open with me about what their problems were and what things they tried, and actually letting me do that due diligence on my target customer before having to write a single line of code. And that's something I'm a huge proponent for. I think you should go as long as you can without writing code and really focus on solving the problem, because that's the hard part of starting a company.
It's a great lesson there, right? It's like you probably don't want to just dive into something or a kind of, a domain where you're not really an expert. But the fact that you already have that pre-existing network and experience is a great takeaway for any kind of founders out there to actually, look at your environment, look at the problems that you face on a daily basis. Do your friends, do your network also have this problem, and just solve from there?
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Yeah. Can you just elaborate on what Clear is and what it does? I understand it's some kind of social app for skincare, but how does it work, and, what problem is it solving?
Yeah, so Clear basically helps you figure out which skincare products to use and to make sure they are working through tracking progress. What that means practically is someone like me, I've suffered with acne all through my teens, still now in my 20s. I've tried lots of different medications, lots of different products, lots of different treatments, but it can be hard to know what's worked, what hasn't worked, like basically just having some kind of diary of what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, what combination of products has worked for you. So with our app, there is a routine tracker. You can log the products you're using. We have a database of over 20,000 products, which means products you use are probably in there. And if they're not, you can scan them in and add them. So you log the products you use, any medications you're on, and you take your progress pictures. And from then on, you can automatically log your routine, just take your pictures once a week. And then if you have a doctor or dermatologist, you can share that with them through the app directly. So that's sort of the tracking side to it. That's then tied into a social community. The reason for this is, as I mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time on existing skincare communities online, mainly on Reddit and on Facebook. And these are huge. There are thousands, millions of people in these communities, and they are extremely active because skin issues are just a problem that affect people, firstly, so frequently, which again, it's horrible to be the sufferer, but from a business perspective, if it's a problem that's frequent and really affects people, that's a great problem to be tackling. So, people are really affected by their skin issues. I've been really affected by mine. And the community aspect is a big piece of it, just finding support from people around you. But one of the limitations with the existing communities is the fact that with skin, it matters who you're getting your information from. And even, one step beyond just like fake news or bad advice, even good advice from someone who doesn't have skin like you is bad advice. So you need to know what skin type, sometimes even what skin color that matters when it comes to the products you use, you're getting your information from. So the idea with Clear is to tie that routine tracking into the social community so that I can find someone with brown skin, oily, acne prone like me, what they have used and what's worked for them. So that's kind of where the community comes in. And then we as a platform, we take that data en masse and then we use that to make product recommendations for people. Because another part of the whole skincare problem is there are millions of products out there and nobody knows which ones to use in the first place. So we don't have our own products. We aren't being paid by one brand to push them to you over another. We really just take the data, we take the reviews, we take the progress pictures, and we take the sentiment in what people are saying about them to make those recommendations for users, because it's in our interest to make recommendations that work.
So, Hannah, what's the business model then? I think you're kind of getting at that, right? Is it that you have these external companies that have products and then you essentially do targeted advertising for them?
No. That's the opposite, because we don't want to advertise to users. We want to make users buy products that will work for them, which sometimes isn't aligned with the advertiser that has the largest budget. So what we do is, number one, we do have an affiliate marketplace. So if a user does buy a product through our platform, we make a small commission, but the commission rates are very low, and this isn't a major priority for us. So oftentimes we can waive the affiliate fee or we don't negotiate. So it's never been a real focus. It's not enough of a driver for us to want to push certain product lines over the other. It's not worth us losing our credibility. So the way that we monetize is through providing services to brands. And we currently have around 2,000 brand and retail partners, ranging from really small, brand new indie brands all the way up to the L'Oreals, the Look Fantastics, the Boots. And what we do when I say services is a couple of different things. That can range from providing product review syndication. So if you're a brand new brand and you don't have many product reviews, people that leave product reviews on our platform, we can basically license them to you so that you can use on your various platforms. Similarly, sourcing product testers. If you're if tomorrow, James, you launch the James face cream and you want to find product testers, you can send them to Siraj and I, but we'll tell you they're nice because, we know you. We don't want to offend you. That's not a great way to get product feedback. But then, if you want to find people who you're targeting the James face cream at, you will have to spend hours conducting basically interviews, making sure people won't run away with your free products. It's really time and capital intensive to actually source product testers. But because of the way Klear is built, we have the demographic information on skin types, locations, ages, etc. And we can see who is a good user, who tracks their routine, who gives back to the community. And those are the people who then end up receiving testers before they hit the market officially, which is also a nice benefit for the super users because they get rewarded for their behavior. So that's another service. And the third, which we haven't started yet, but will be a big focus for next year, is on data and essentially market research. So not allowing brands to advertise on our platform, but having a better understanding of the skincare landscape, of, routine landscape, which products are people with acne using, which, if someone's using a L'Oreal product in their routine, which are the complementary products they're using, how frequently do they repurchase a given product? So we work with brands to provide them with those insights on their products and how their consumers are using them.
I see. And how will the brands interface with that last third piece that you mentioned?
So it's through a report, actually. This is something that we, as I said, we haven't switched on just yet because we're in the stages of finalizing the details on it. Essentially replicating what existing market research agencies provide, which is a report, recommendations, and then a massive Excel file of raw data pertaining to their brand and their brand only.
Mm-hmm. I know that you mentioned that one of the aspects of the data you collect, because I imagine when a user comes on, they fill out their profile, their skin profile, complexion, things like that. So how much information can you extract from the progress pictures that they apply? Because I imagine there's some sort of image recognition, sort of machine learning technology that could be applied there. Are you looking down those avenues or keeping it more to the user fields that people just fill out?
It's both. And how advanced the face scanning gets is constrained by our team size and our priorities as far as product and releasing features. But the idea is that, for the very first version of the recommendations algorithm, it was just user input. That's the most reliable, and we haven't built out this sort of face scanning system. As we progress, our scans get better, and also the more data we have, the more effective those scans get. So we've started with acne as that's even just visually one of the easier things to identify on a face than other skin concerns, which is why we started there. But absolutely is part of our pipeline to really extract as much as we can from those images and also be able to give that feedback to users. Because another issue that we find very frequently is we use a product and we don't actually know if it's done anything to our skin.
Yeah.
So not only using that for our purposes to make recommendations, but also giving users quantitative information on how their skin has changed after using certain products for a certain amount of time is another part of what we're working towards in the product.
Very interesting, because what I'm sort of thinking is like, because you are gradually going to be building this data moat of one users and one brands who are having their products actually tested on your platform. So at one point, given your reputation grows, it's like you could have like a clear rating, like this product has been used on our platform and it has like a 98% approval, and brands sort of look to your company and say, hey, if Clear can recognize us and our product actually does really well with them, then hey, that's like a big tick of approval. Like, hey, now we've got a great product.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because even at this relatively small scale, we're at a couple of thousand users and we're still a fairly young company. Brands will ask us, they're like, how are our products performing? I was like, oh, wouldn't you like to know? But it's interesting that it matters to them. Even with just several thousand users, they want to know which products people are using, what people are saying about their products. And so currently we do have some infrastructure where brands can interface with their users, kind of run fan pages on our account with their own community managers, and they get like email notifications if people leave product reviews and things like that. But yeah, it's super interesting, and the vision really is to create an ecosystem and try to make skincare more innovative, both on the consumer perspective of how we figure out which products to use, make sure they're really working, but also from the brand's perspective. A major issue that they have is the fact that this data is hard to get, and not just from the market insights perspective, but from the actual product efficacy perspective. There aren't long-term studies on how consumer products are on people's skin. So if we can actually, again, long-term provide some of that abstracted data to brands and the cosmetic formulators, in theory, formulations should also improve and products should actually get better.
Yeah, because experience I have with skincare products is like, you know, my mom or a family member will suggest something, but oh yeah, use this thing. It's great. You know, it'll be really good. Use it every day. And I use it, and then, you know, nothing happens. And it's like a black box to me. It's like, well, what's good? What's not? You go to a shop. It's like, oh, there's all this stuff. Okay, well, I'm not going to buy any of that. I'm just going to buy some E45 and stick to that. That's probably the height of my knowledge about skincare, if I'm perfectly honest.
Well, as long as you're moisturizing and have a good SPF, that's a great starting point.
I don't even know what an SPF is.
He doesn't need SPF. Look at that skin tone. But Hannah, what's really interesting is, like, again, we've spoken to a number of founders that are kind of doing things in a similar way that you are. And what I mean by that is kind of the trend of putting power with the consumer. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone's kind of well aware there's a big global trend where power is being taken away or kind of transferred from corporations towards the consumer. So now obviously we have all the social medias and everyone's becoming a creator, and kind of music's decentralized, you know, media is decentralized, film, kind of news, all of this stuff. And you seem to be doing the same thing, but in a very interesting niche, which is, I just kind of wanted to get your view on how you see that fitting in with the wider trend of, you know, how is shifting from big companies to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's at the heart of what we're doing. We're helping and empowering the consumer to make more informed decisions about their skin, and not be so susceptible to marketing ploys from big companies. And I think part of that is fueled selfishly from my own issues and my own desire, and coming back to being a founder that's been affected by the problem that I'm trying to solve. It's not in my interest to make bad product recommendations, because I don't want them. I know how much it sucks when you try something that doesn't work. You get your hopes up, you spend a bunch of money, and it amounts to nothing. So I think there's that element. And also just with the pandemic, people spending way more time at home researching products, and in the beauty space in particular. People just want to know what they're using, what they're buying. Now with these macroeconomic conditions, people have less money to spend. So if they're going to spend it, it may as well be on something worthwhile. And I think all of these different factors play into this element of empowering the consumer, because ultimately, without the consumers, the brands are nothing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Hannah, if we take a step back, so in this journey of yours, what would you say have been the biggest obstacles to your success and challenges that you faced on a personal level?
Yeah, I'd say that there's probably three. The biggest challenge was fundraising. And I say that having managed to get through it and to the other side, and I raised enough money to, grow the team, get us to our next set of milestones. But it was really hard. It took more than 200 meetings, and I was doing 10 a day sometimes. And it's soul crushing, right? Like, this is a company is everything I've worked for, worked super hard. And you're doing 10 meetings a day. You have to give the same story with the same energy and excitement, get the same questions, which can have ranging levels of intelligence behind them. And then, between meetings, you're getting rejections, and you still have to just like pick yourself up and do it again and again and again. And so I think just dealing with that and the emotions of that was really tough. And despite going through Y Combinator and YC were incredibly helpful in a lot of ways, I don't think anything could quite prepare me for what fundraising would be, because there was just very little. I think people don't talk very openly about what drives investors and decisions. And, we all watch Dragon's Den and The Apprentice and shows like that, and you think it's like the business model or the product or the founder. And of course, if you have all three stellar, like, yes, your company will succeed and do great. But people don't talk about the psychology and the FOMO and the fact that investors are, they're fallible human beings susceptible to all the same biases that we are. So yes, if they feel like they're going to miss out on something, even if it's not rational, they will invest. And that can sometimes be a bigger driver than hard metrics or traction or something that makes rational sense. And I felt that was a huge part of of my experience. And it was also the first time where I really felt I noticed gender biases, which up till that point, I'd always been the type of person to be like, you shouldn't highlight these differences, like that makes the problem worse. And I thought going to Imperial, where like, I'm sure you had a similar experience, very few girls, but I didn't think that made me a worse physicist. When in my band, like, it's mainly men in the society or in esports society. Like, my team was all boys. None of this impacted me, and I never felt it was a hindrance to my success. And to be very frank, also building my company, I think as a female founder, building in the skincare space, I'm able to have these open conversations with users because I'm a woman. I think it's an advantage in some ways. But when it came to fundraising, what made it interesting is I got like, I'd say about 75% of the way through, and I was just like, is it me or are all my investors women? And I looked at the statistics of like who I'd taken meetings with, who had invested and how much money they'd invested. And it turns out that 75% of the meetings I'd done were with male investors, which is kind of expected. There's a lot more out there. Of the number of investors on my cap table, around 80% were women. And in terms of capital invested, over 90% of the dollars that I have raised were decisions led by female investors, which, like, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. My hit rate's not a nice way of putting it, but my success rate with female investors was so much higher than with male investors. And it just made me think, like, as I said, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And it was the first time where I actually questioned, why is this the way that it is? And the more I learned about fundraising and the psychology that I alluded to and some of the biases that we face, and that there were a lot of them, I think, in my case, the fact that I didn't have friends and family to get my round going because my friends were all students, no one's got any money. So every dollar I raised, I had to fight for from every investor. Then the fact that a lot of men do have limited understanding about skincare, to the point that some investors told me skincare is not a market. It's an industry like worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But if people have made up their mind, sometimes it's very, very difficult to persuade them with all the facts and numbers. So I think there were a lot of small things like this. The fact that I didn't have a huge network of investors to get my round going, the fact that I'm building a product that primarily caters to women, and hence sometimes the average investor doesn't understand the market, the fact that it's a new product, we're not copy pasting what's been done before. So there are a lot of risks associated. And if you don't understand the market, and I'm a first time founder, I'm 21 years old, like, it's hard to get people over the edge to actually take that bet on me. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
Do you think that's rightly or wrongly? Do you think that's a takeaway then for any female founders, that actually you'll have better success when fundraising if you go into a female dominated space?
Yeah. I mean, looking at the numbers, like, I'm not sure what else to make of it. My success rate was just much higher with female investors. So
I think at the end of the day, an investor wants to kind of relate to you, right? They want to yes, they want a return. I know it's particularly in the down market, investors is particularly asking founders, like grilling them on like, where's my return? Like, am I going to make money? But it's very important. You tell me if I'm wrong here, but it's very important to have that kind of personal relationship with your investor and get along with them. And if they just do not understand the market, or they're not the target market in any way, that can be a lot harder to build that kind of connection, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's like with any relationship that we have, you tend to build empathy and relationships easier with people you have some form of relatability with. And I think in some ways I'm not relatable to a lot of typical investors, and they weren't relatable to me. What kind of upset me about the experience was knowing that I'd gone into this, like coming from a top university, studying a technical degree. I'm a technical founder. Like, yes, although I'm a brown woman, I'd interned at like all the big firms. I had a very strong CV and a very stereotypical background in that sense of coming at this very strong, having a good product, good traction, good background, all of that. And it was still this hard. Like, I'd just gone through YC as well. Like, everything was, all of the circumstances were that I should be successful. And I was in the end. But it was so, so hard. And I feel like it is off-putting for women to start companies and then try and raise capital, because like, if it was this hard for me, like I see how hard it is for other female founders as well. And the numbers are also pretty discouraging. I think this year even less capital was invested in female founders, but I didn't think it was surprising because I knew how hard it was when it's difficult to compare exact situations and circumstances, but on average, when I talk to my male founder friends versus female founder friends, there's just a lot of differences in the dynamics and the experiences that we have. And there's only so much you can ignore them before saying that actually I think there is a problem here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually very eye-opening what you said, because I mean, you hear these things online and you hear them through networking events and things like that, but actually hearing your experience is like, okay, wow, it's clear, it's evident in the data, right? But James, I want to go back to something you said, because it ties into what we've been talking about here. It's like, Anna, you mentioned that investors should be objective. Realistically, they're not, because they're human, but an investor's role is to increase an internal rate of return, right? And identify a good opportunity where it is, irrespective of their emotional bias to or against it. So James, when you said, your investors, yeah, ideally they should relate to you. But I think a good investor is somebody that can look at an opportunity and say, hey, I don't really get this, but this person knows what they're doing. The market is clearly there. The facts are there. The traction's there. I think we should give it a shot. I think that to me, whenever I was working in VC, like, we would commonly bring in companies that I initially, because I was 21, 22 in that situation. So I would go to my manager and say, yeah, I don't really get the target market. I don't think there's anything there. It's like, well, do you not get it because you don't get it, or because there's actually no market? And he would challenge me quite regularly. So we'd end up, interviewing and doing what are called screening interviews with a number of companies that initially I thought, surely this is just, not the space to be in right now. Where's the AI? Where's the hardware technology? Where's the good stuff? Going studying electrical engineering, can't really blame me for that. But I think, James, that investors should be objective and open to new opportunities, even if they don't personally relate to it.
It's a very good point, but there is, I think, a nuance to that. The nuance being, it kind of depends what kind of investor you are, right? Because some investors are quite hands off and some investors are more hands on. I think it's a question of, at the end of the day, you're placing a bet on the person and their idea and their team and their ability to pull it off. And I think an investor can be a lot more confident in their bet and almost give himself an edge if they have knowledge of that space. I'd love to hear your take, Ohana, on that as well.
And also a question to what James said, would you have targeted investors that are active in the consumer goods space? Because that seems to me the kind of, so someone with a lot of operational experience with firms like Procter and Gamble, or like big consumer goods space that sell healthcare products, they would be ideal to be on your cap table, right? So would you have targeted those kind of people in your search?
Yeah, just to touch on the first point around like the biases, etc. I think I totally agree with you, James. I don't think investors are out there to discriminate, but I think it's just how we are. We are all comfortable with things that we know. And that's good. That's a really hard bias to overcome. And regarding targeting the right people, I didn't do any targeting, which was a huge mistake that I made. And I was fortunate that I had a lot of inbound interest. And that was intentional. I'd purposely been posting a lot on my LinkedIn. I'd started a YouTube channel documenting my company updates with the whole purpose of getting visibility in front of investors, because I didn't know how. And so it wasn't that I didn't have enough meetings. I certainly did, but it was oftentimes with the wrong kinds of investors, like Series A, sometimes even Series B investors. But I'm thinking, well, they've reached out to me, so they must be willing to make an exception. And of course, they never want to say no, so they'll start the spiel by saying like, oh yeah, we're a Series A fund, but we make the odd pre-seed investment. And then I am there believing them, thinking like, wow, like the stars are going to align, they're going to invest.
Any attention at the start, right? It's just like you want any kind of sense that you're getting traction.
Well, exactly. And you would think like if they're the ones reaching out, they would be interested, which I'm sure they wanted to talk, but that doesn't mean they're interested in investing, which was something that I didn't understand when I started fundraising. So I had all these big name VC meetings lined up, and I was there, calling all my friends, being really smug, saying I'm talking to this person, that person, I'm probably going to close my round in like a week. And then obviously it didn't end up that way. And not to say, some of them actually like did end up investing, whether it's through the funds or the partners themselves as angels. But for the most part, like my success rate was very, very low. And I think part of that was because I was taking meetings with absolutely everyone without any regard for what is the chance they will actually invest. And the other thing that I'd say even care too much about was who the money was coming from, because I had a plan. I knew how I wanted to build the company and what I needed the funds for. I wasn't really looking for strategic investors in this round of like who can actually provide me with introductions or, operational advice or open up a talent pool, etc. I just needed money, and I was happy to take it from whoever. I think I really had a beggars can't be choosers mentality that if someone's willing to give me money, I'm going to take it because that's what I need. And I did. And I think if I were to do it again, I don't think that mentality was wrong. I'd probably do the same thing, but I would absolutely be more targeted, not just because I'd bring on people who understood the sector better and would actually be able to help as potential angels or if they had connections to funds, but just because the chance of success would have been higher with people that understand the industry. And I see that now. Obviously, I'm not fundraising, so they are slightly different conversations. But when I talk to companies, like L'Oreal, we won a competition they ran earlier, and just seeing how these are all people who work in the space and they understand what we're building and why we're building it. It was the easiest. Like I didn't have to convince them; they were convinced before I even started talking about my company, which was not the case for most of the investors I was talking to because they just don't get beauty tech. So yeah, I would definitely target people who understand my company if I was raising my round again.
These are all valid lessons as an early entrepreneur, right? That you learn along the journey, because we spoke to some people that work in the fundraising space, and they were kind of saying, a very important thing is to kind of profile your investors as if it was dating almost. Like, are you the right investor for me? Like, because ultimately, if they do invest in you, you probably know this from your investors now. You probably spend a lot of time with them, speaking to them, updating them, and making sure they're on top of your progress as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a lifelong relationship. And so you do want to make sure that you're getting in bed with the right people.
Mm-hmm. What's fascinating as well, Ahana, is that you kind of, if you go back to what you said at the start, you made your first product, which was the cool transcripting, the meeting notes, right? Yeah. And from the way you told it, you were like, okay, and then I applied to YC, like it happened the next day. So what was your kind of reasoning behind that? Because a lot of founders, they'll look at YC and be like, this is a holy grail. Like once I get in, I'm sorted for life. I think it is good advice that you should only chase fundraising or apply to accelerators when you're actually ready for it. And, you kind of have a critical mass of, customers and maybe even product market fit. Firstly, whether you agree with that or not. And secondly, what was the kind of trigger for you to actually apply to YC?
Yeah, I think I would disagree on the accelerator point, because accelerators are fairly low effort as far as time and resources required, and it doesn't reflect negatively to apply multiple times, especially with YC. I think more than half of the founders that go through get in on their second time. And so it's very low effort, and you don't necessarily have to commit to an entire fundraise. If it doesn't work, you don't really lose anything, but you stand a lot to gain if it does work out. Whereas an entire fundraise, I think when you start taking individual meetings with investors, it can be, it can signal negatively if you're perpetually in a state of fundraising. Investors wonder why you're still fundraising if you haven't closed your round. So I would agree with it in the sense of, always fundraising. But I do think with accelerators, there is no too early. There were people in YC who were earlier than I was, and my company was 4 days old when I got in. There were people who were just people with tech and like not even at the idea stage. And they got in. And yes, this was the minority. The average YC company will be a couple months, maybe a year old with some traction. But I don't think any entrepreneur has a straightforward journey or there's one path to follow. And I think if there's an opportunity there, you lose very little by applying, and you stand to gain a lot. So my advice is always apply, even before you feel ready. The reason I applied was because I didn't know what YC really was. And that's why I say if I knew, I would have probably had the same reservations that a lot of people do. But all that I knew was my co-founder at the time did the Imperial MIT exchange, and all he said was that everyone at MIT worships people that do this YC thing. And I was like, what's YC? So I went on the website. I saw like Airbnb, Dropbox. Okay, cool. I've heard of these companies. That's good. And there was a form to apply, and I didn't think twice. And I think part of it was because I was in that stage of my life where I was applying like rampantly to every kind of job opportunity. I'd secured my one job in banking, one in PE, and I didn't care. I was applying to hedge funds. I was like doing all sorts, and I think it was partly because I thought I'll never get a PE job straight out of uni, but then I did, and I was like, like actually, if you just apply to things, even if you don't think you'll get them, it can happen. So then I not that it worked out much beyond that for me, but I was applying to everything indiscriminately because I also had nothing to lose. Like I already had great offers if that's what I needed to do. So I think it was very much just in that kind of mindset of like, let me apply to this YC thing. I'm not expecting anything of it, not banking on it to work out. But if it does, hey, like I wouldn't mind. And then almost against all odds, it did. And it, without sounding overly dramatic, it changed my life. And it accelerated my career by a good, I'd say 10 years, because this is where I wanted to be after having made some money so that I could fund my own company and live independently. But I've been able to do that at this age and learn the things that I have about fundraising and building a team and building a product. And, I never would have imagined to learn these kinds of lessons this early on in my career.
Do you think that's what they saw in you then? Because you said at the start, right? Your idea wasn't really fully formed. You were surprised they took you on because they liked you as a person. Now, just from your story, I can tell, you have hustle, you have determination, you'll keep going, you'll always look for opportunity. Is that what you think the YC guys saw in you and why they took a chance on you?
Well, yeah, it has to be. There was nothing else, to be honest. Like the product was bad. The idea wasn't like, an idea is such a small part of a company's success. So I think, yeah, which is the biggest compliment, to be honest, that they did see something in me, and thought that I'd be able to do it. And I hope that I've proven them right. I've got a long way to go and a lot of things to learn, and a lot of things still can go wrong with the company. I think you're never fully like just coasting as a founder, but I think so far, like I have proven I've been resilient. There've been a lot of major challenges. I mentioned fundraising, but the two others were navigating team dynamics and like the personal aspect of the sacrifices you have to make to sustain this kind of a career. And these are all big challenges. And another learning I've had is that this absolutely is not for everyone. I know I'm quite public on my LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff about talking about how great startups are, but I also try and share the not great parts of it. And my honest belief is that it's just not for everyone. It's a choice. And some personality types, some people with certain skills are great at it and others are not great at it. But if you think that you will be good at it and you think that you are a good fit, then you should absolutely pursue it. And it can be incredibly rewarding. But at the same time, it's really, really hard. And there's a lot of downsides that come with the responsibility and the autonomy and flexibility. So yeah, I think it's just, I think, or I'd like to think that YC thought that I'd be the right kind of person, and I think I am. So, yeah.
I think the lesson to take away from that is that you should be optimistic whenever you try to do something, right? Like if you didn't know that what YC was, but you're just optimistic that, hey, what's the worst that could go wrong here, right? It's like, yeah. I'll send out this application, maybe I'll get an interview. If I get an interview, I'll put on my best self, have a conversation and see what they think. And it worked out. I think that's something a lot of entrepreneurs share, is that they're very almost delusionally optimistic. It's like, yeah, I have the audacity to believe that I can bring my dreams into reality. Mm-hmm. Most people would look at it and say, well, you're crazy. What are you talking about?
And equally, I think it's about not being too afraid of failure, because in this situation, the worst thing that can happen is you're rejected and it doesn't work out, and being completely okay with that. And for me, I was so lucky YC worked out. But the truth was, I applied to every Imperial accelerator before that and got rejected from all of them. And like, I knew that was a possibility, but I think it's being okay with like knowing that you may get rejected and it may not work, and still doing it anyway.
You still land on your feet and you can go again, right?
Yeah.
So Ahana, what about the, I got you on LinkedIn and I saw you put a lot of YouTube videos up. So how did that start? You mentioned that it was more for exposure to be seen, but how effective have you found that? Because I mean, one of the reasons why James and I started this podcast was to get into the industry of content creation and spread knowledge and kind of build a community through that. I assume similar reasons for yourself.
Yeah.
What's your experience been with that?
Well, for me, I always see myself as a founder first. So everything I do is to further my company. And what happened was, it was about April of 2021, and I started writing code for Clear and was thinking about launching in 2 months' time. And then demo day was approaching at the end of the summer in August. So I knew I had to gain traction and I had to get leads with investors. And I was like, okay, here's a problem. How on earth do I do it? Because at the time I was kind of active on LinkedIn. I had like 500 plus connections, but nothing crazy. And I didn't use any other social media platforms. Like I didn't have TikTok, like I deleted Instagram. I despised Twitter. Like I didn't use social media, but I actually didn't know how to get that kind of exposure. So it was in part to gain exposure with people who would download the app, and partly to gain exposure with potential investors. So those are my two goals for doing it. And I, again, never imagined that I would be doing content creation or anything like that. But at least with YouTube, I am a consumer. So I watch YouTube and I understand the platform. So I thought that would be a good place to start. And the first video I did was just a monthly update video, because I was writing out these monthly investor updates. My only investor was YC at the time, but I would still write them. And I thought, why not just put these into a video and document my experience building this company? And so that's what I did. And, you know, the numbers weren't crazy or anything. Like, I'm pretty sure it was just my mum watching the video 100 times, but I actually enjoyed it. Like, I didn't cringe too hard. I thought, actually, it's nice. Like, in a couple of months, when I look back at this, it will be nice to see what I did that month and what I achieved and what I learned. And so it started as a purely selfish, company selfish, how do I get visibility? And it worked, to be honest. It got me visibility. It got people, I think it made me stand out in some way, on a small scale, but enough to get initial traction, so such that I was happy with my user metrics over the summer. And it kind of then became more about actually a more ongoing brand building and serving something that I'm passionate about, which is educating people about startups. As I just said, it's not for everyone at all. And I think there's a lot of information about building a company that's not talked about enough, that should be, or, it's gatekept by people within the community. And so I think to encourage more people who may see, themselves as entrepreneurs, or at least be interested in learning more about it, my goal is to just share some of the lessons I've had, some of the mistakes I made, and share occasional updates with what's actually going on with my company and what's it like to be a founder. And so now as I said, everything I do is founder first. So I'm still doing it to continue gaining that visibility, brand building. Next year, we will start some paid acquisition, but to this point, it's all been organic, word of mouth. And most of that has been through my social platforms personally. And so in that sense, like it's free user acquisition, which is great. And it's helped with the brand building beyond just Clear, but also the personal branding of whether Clear brings you value in your skincare journey. If you are an aspiring entrepreneur and want to learn about how to give a pitch or whether you should raise from angels or VCs, hopefully my videos can be some kind of resource to you.
Yeah, I do love that final point. Obviously, it's kind of along the lines of why we created the podcast as well, to actually encourage people. Because I think, being an entrepreneur can be glamorized a lot, which is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's like, it can almost encourage people who aren't natural entrepreneurs to become entrepreneurs, but it can also kind of discourage perhaps maybe the more slightly introverted type who kind of looks at what it is and is like, oh, I'm not about that. But actually, they're the ones who spend 15 hours a day on their passion project, and they're building something amazing in their garage or their bedroom, and it will never see the light of day commercially because they don't understand that that's actually a route they can go down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. It's about just, I think, shedding light on what it is. It's not about pushing people into pursuing it or glamorizing it. There's a lot of really unglamorous things, like, you work ridiculously long hours. I haven't taken a holiday since a week during my fundraise in 2021 because I needed it for my own sanity. But this year, I haven't taken time off, and I'm exhausted. I'm really tired. And there's a lot of unpleasant things you have to go through. Like, you have to let go of people, engage in conflicts, give negative feedback, deal with push from investors. None of these are pleasant things to go through. But again, it's a choice. Like, I could have chosen a different path, but I would rather have chosen this path and face some of these challenges and learn from them than anything else, which is unique to me, and it's not for everyone. And I think as long as you're going into making an informed decision about your career, that's all you can do. And I think podcasts like this that you guys are working on and other resources online as well can help people make those educated decisions.
I think it's something that's very commonly glorified as well, or glamorized. Because when I was at university, I always thought oh yeah, I'll go to Imperial, meet someone who's really technologically enabled. I'll be the commercially enabled. We'll start a business. It'll be like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and sail off into the sunset. That was my plan. That's what I told the guy in Freshers Week in some club in Embankment. That's what I was going to do. He just looked at me like I was an idiot. And I was like, this guy doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. But yeah, I think you're right. Having the resource and actually knowing what you're going to be in for, what is this life all about? I have a friend who is currently in a fundraise, and he said, look, if this comes through, I'm not going to have a day off for 7 years. I will have to be switched on all the time. And that's the reality of it. That is for a potential payout that may very well not happen. And the odds are stacked against it not happening. So it's is that something that, if you're going into the space, you have to ask yourself, is that something I really want? Because it's very possible I can get a really good paying job that I'm comfortable with, that respects me, that gives me time off, where I'm allowed to work remote, and I can live a good life. But I think a lot of people, I don't know, James, we had some thoughts on this before where we spoke to someone, and it was I think a lot of people get caught up in the egotism of I'm the founder, it's me, I'm the person, right?
I'm on the cover of TechCrunch. It's all about the press. It's not about, and listening to, guys who work at YC or, people who are really deep in the space or who have been founders for over decades. It's always your launch day is when you get customers. Yeah. When you actually have a customer, and it doesn't matter if it's one, just make someone happy and make someone willing to pay your product and build up a very kind of passionate community around that. And it kind of goes back to so many things in life, including networking, I would say. It's a point I've made before in the podcast, which is you shouldn't be making a million kind of loose connections, right? You should be making 10, 100 really, really solid connections when you're starting out, right? You can go into any place and just work the room and like meet loads of people, right? Spending 5-10 minutes with them. But when you rather spend 2 hours, 3 hours going into really deep topics with them, really getting to know them as a person. And I honestly think the same goes for investors, customers, and all of that, right? And I think it just ties into that point of like people look at it very high level and being like, I'm going to be famous, like I'm going to be the man, everyone's going to know me kind of thing, right? But it's actually about serving customers, you know, finding their pain points, really honing in on what a problem may be.
Yeah, 100%. I think that starting a company is about solving a problem for people. But not everyone goes into it with those intentions, which, you know what, like everyone is entitled to live their own life and do what they want. And if they go into it for these reasons, then like, yes, they may get the press and the excitement and the glitz and glamour, but then at the end of the day, like they're also the ones that experience the downsides of that. And like companies close, that especially last year when there was a lot more money being invested into a lot of companies where zero due diligence was being done. Like at the time I was fuming. I was raising at the same time against some of these people. And it's like seeing how other people are raising versus what I have to go through really pissed me off, to be very honest. But now, like, we're a year later and I've got the runway, I've got a company, I've got users, I've got a team, and a lot of these companies are already gone. And like, that's very unpleasant for them to have to go, well, or maybe it wasn't for them, I don't know. But if I was in that situation, you're messing with people's lives and careers and jobs. I don't think it's responsible to raise a bunch of money on an empty thing, like travel the world in first class, buy designer clothes, and then your company dies like 3 months later because you've got no money left, which happens. And like for those founders, like, you know what, fair play to them. I'm sure they will be fine. Like they've made the connections, they can live the good life. But then they didn't go into it to solve a problem and start a company. They did it for their own personal growth, like enjoyment, which fair enough. But like call a spade a spade. That's what it is. That's not.
Yeah, people get caught up in the moment as well, right? It's like when there's all this money flowing around, everyone's like, I want a piece of that pie. It's exactly why, all these coins just went to the moon and all of this, right? And it's like, obviously, investors are the same because, 2 years ago, last year, it was Web3. Now generative AI is like the new thing. And you're going to see all the investors like who had, all the Andreessen types who were all about crypto. Now suddenly be like, yeah, we've been about generative AI this whole time. What are you talking about? That kind of thing. I think it's human condition at the end of the day. And I think it's common advice that like, if you really want to separate yourself, and the best investors always, they look at the long-term trends. And I think that's why, I'm seeing, me personally, like a lot more investors, particularly in Europe, focus on deep tech startups, because it's very much like this may not come to fruition in the next year, 2 years, maybe it's 5-10 years, before they get any kind of, measurable impact. But because it's a downturn, even in B2B SaaS, you're not going to see anything measurable these days because, a lot of your potential customers, there might be layoffs if they're enterprises, everyone's going to be kind of clutching to their purse strings a bit tighter. So you really need to look at like what's going to deliver long-term value.
Yeah. And I think as the founder, if you are serious about like building a company, then you just have to be focused on solving that problem and doing what you need to do to get to product market fit, and trying not to let other things and vanity metrics in particular distract you. And that's all you can do. And if the company fails after you've tried your best, there's no shame in it. And, coming back to this thinking of worst case scenarios, the worst thing that can happen to me is my company fails, which at that point, being very realistic, I will be fine. I'm 23 years old. I've had so much experience, like all of us, come from a top uni. My life will not end if my company dies, which is the worst thing that can happen. But I will sleep well at night knowing that I've tried everything. If I've talked to users, been diligent, like looked at the metrics, been honest, sought out feedback. And companies die for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes like the timing just isn't right, or, it just wasn't meant to be. Maybe it was a bad idea after all. These things happen and that's okay. But if you've tried your best, there's nothing more that you can do. And I think like as long as everyone is just trying their best, you can't expect much more from founders. And the end result is almost secondary. Like if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, then there's nothing more you could have done.
And there's a big ego element of that as well, right? Because you always hear, and you know, it happens on a day-to-day basis. All of us is like you get very married or attached to your ideas or stuff you've created. And I think at the end of the day, it's just ego getting in the way of like maybe I spend a week, a month on this MVP, and now customers are telling me that they don't even want it. Like what's all that? Like it's gone to shit kind of thing, and people are kind of afraid to pivot. And, they don't want to move on from what they initially have their vision and their mindset on. So I think it's a really important lesson there about not kind of coming in quite open-minded. And as you said, trying your best, but also not being too married to like your original vision or your original kind of, what you wanted this company to be, because it may end up being completely differently. But Hannah, I know you're very busy and we are too, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I did have one more last question. I understand you kind of, back in the day, you were like a footballer and a gymnast, and now I'm seeing like guitars behind you as well. So I'm just like, I'm literally wondering, like, what were you like as a kid? Were you like one of those kids who just tried everything? Were you like hyper focused? Were you the ADHD type, or just give us a little bit of insight there?
I wouldn't say I tried everything, but I tried a wide range of things, and for the things that I did try, I tried really hard. So yeah, I was a gymnast, and I came third in Wales when I was 9, so look at me. And then, I took football quite seriously. I've always been into music and had a band and took that quite seriously as well. But then I was also very studious. Like I cared a lot about my grades in school. And so I think I did.
So you had no friends, right? You must have had zero social life, surely.
Yeah, I know, it's like the triangle. But I think for things that I cared about, I've always just like tried really hard. And now, although my guitar playing doesn't happen as much, and I'm certainly no longer a professional gymnast, my job has so many different facets to it. And in a way, like I think I'm actually very similar. That I am a jack of all trades, master of none. But I always give it 100%, no matter what I'm doing. But yeah, always had a super wide range of interests. But the holy trinity for me was always like some sport, which now is like gym, music, which used to be guitar. Now it's more just listening, and League of Legends are the 3 constants that have always stayed.
I hope that's where the comparisons with SPF stop.
Yeah.
But no, that's great insight. And I think, yeah, just to add on that, it's like, you always hear the best founders, they have such a wide range of interests, and they're always reading about stuff that isn't necessarily related to business, right? It's very easy to get kind of caught in this trap of like, oh, how can I be a better operator? How can I be a better CEO? How can I be better at this hard skill? But actually, expand your horizons a bit, read about other stuff, indulge in other hobbies, to make yourself more of a well-rounded person. And I do appreciate your kind of point of view and your experiences as well, because it goes a little bit against what we've heard in the past, which is find your edge and lead into it, and then kind of hire a team around it. But to kind of fill in your gaps, your lack of, your weaker areas per se, if that makes sense. So it's very interesting that you've kind of come at it from like, I'm an all-rounder, I can code, I'm good with people, clearly, I can, sell myself well, I'm good at relating to people and connecting with people. And I think it's clear that has, added to each step of your journey and helped you become kind of where you are today. But Suraj, did you have any final questions for our guest?
No, I didn't. Just thanks very much for joining us. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you so much for having me. That lovely ending, James. I'll take all the compliments. Keep them coming.
Anytime. Yeah, we'll start the episode with that.
Amazing. Well, no, honestly, thank you so much for reaching out and for having me on. Really enjoyed the chat.
Anytime. Great to catch up.
Cool.
See ya.
All right.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.